Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Saṅghaṃ Namasami. We've reached that time of year that we call the Vasa, the entering of the rains, which is a monastic practice that has been going on now uninterrupted for 2,600 years, since the time of the Buddha. It's an occasion when Buddhist monks, nuns all over the world take the opportunity to stay in one place for 3 months to practice the Dhamma and the Vinaya. It's an allowance the Buddha gave to save the Sangha members from travelling around, particularly in the old days when they had to travel to find support, find cloth and so on, or travel for different reasons. The Vasa is the rainy season, so that coincides with our winter in Australia, where we are, so it's a suitable time to stop travel and other activities and have a 3-month retreat. But it's a time that's not just for the Sangha. Whenever the Sangha are on retreat, they need support. So it's also a time for the Buddhist community as a whole to support the Sangha through that retreat with the basic necessities and requisites, but also with their practice. And it's a time many Buddhists will make determinations or decide to take on certain practices to further their efforts in their practice of the Dhamma. And that can be on any level, say like on the level of the practice of generosity, making determinations to practice generosity regularly for 3 months, maybe attending monasteries like this, coming to offer food every day or every week or every month, whatever one decides is possible and effective for you. One can determine to keep precepts, 5 precepts, 8 precepts, and one can make determinations such as to meditate every day, once a day or twice a day, listen to Dhamma regularly, or maybe more specific plans can be made. So sometimes people want to do a certain practice, so they might say, well, I'm going to meditate on the theme of metta, loving kindness, every day for 30 minutes for the 90 days of this retreat time. Or I'm going to give up drinking alcohol so that I can keep the precepts better, or I'm going to give up swearing, telling lies, maybe give up killing. Maybe some people still have the habit of swatting flies, killing insects, ants, whatever comes into their kitchen or house. You might determine for the 3 months I'm not going to intentionally, deliberately kill anything. If I encounter a stream of ants coming into my house, I'll find some other way to deal with the problem, and so on. there's a whole variety of practices we can take on, goals we can set ourselves, and use this 3 months as a way to develop our practice and our personal discipline and commitment. Because the practice of the Buddhist path does require some effort. Once you have your interest and your faith, then that has to be translated into effort in the practice of generosity, living in a virtuous way, cultivating the mind through the development of mindfulness and samadhi, and developing insight. All of these different aspects of the practice require effort, discipline, and persistent, constant effort as well. So over the centuries, Buddhists have found that the vasa, the range retreat, is a very good time to experiment with the practice, with maybe the overall goal is to deepen your practice, but also making short-term goals. And they're important in our practice because the long-term goal of ending suffering, attaining nibbana, is what the Buddhist practice is all about. Attaining the highest happiness, a mind that is completely liberated from suffering. We have that as our goal. But that's quite a lofty goal, and maybe we're not there yet. So we also have to learn how to use the practice skillfully and make more short-term goals as well to help develop a sense of personal achievement and little by little to change some of our habits of body, speech and mind, because we're working on all 3 levels. These are the 3 levels that we make karma in our life, good or bad. And so we might decide to make some small decisions or set up some small goals for ourselves over the next 3 months based on what we've observed about ourselves in the past, what we know about ourselves so far in our life, and where we think we might be able to improve. So Ajahn Chah used to give a very good reflection at the beginning of the 3 months range retreat. He'd say, practice what the Buddha called the apanaka patipata, the practices that are never wrong. So that is the practice of sense restraint, practice of wakefulness and mindfulness, and eating, restraint in food and moderation in the consumption of food and by extension by other things that we consume. So just giving the sort of flavour of our practice, which is one of moderation, developing contentment with what we have so that we're not spending all the time in our life seeking more in the terms of material things and experiences. So learning moderation and contentment with what we have, and then diverting or channeling our energy more into the training of the mind for the higher goals of developing mindfulness, samadhi, insight, and abandoning some of the suffering and the stress that we keep running into in our daily life. So eating little, sleeping little, talking little, these are teachings Ajahn Chah would give all the time. And practicing mindfulness a lot, practicing restraint, sense restraint a lot. These are the kind of things he would encourage, the qualities and the teachings he would encourage at this time of year, entering the rains. Because we all tend towards the extreme of indulgence in our life. It's unfortunately one of the karmic results of living in the world at this time. We have material comfort and wealth and an abundance of sense stimulation at our fingertips all the time with technology and just the material wealth of the world. We're living in a consumer society and so on. So I think most people, if they stop and reflect on their lives, they'll admit that maybe caught up too much sometimes in the sensual or material side of life and not paying enough attention to our own mind and the real cause of our suffering. So sometimes it's good to just cut things off. And just now we chanted the Awada Patimokkha, where we say, abandoning all evil or unskillful ways, cultivating the good, purifying our mind. This is the summary of the Buddhist path. Everybody loves to do good. If your friend says, come on, let's go and do something good, do some volunteer work, or go and offer some dana, or let's go and meditate, or let's go and help somebody. We love to do that. But we also have to learn how to abandon the not good, the unskillful. And so living in a consumer society, that might mean just learning to be a bit modest in what we seek to achieve and consume. So in the Vasa you might decide, well, I'm going to, some people determine to keep the 8 precepts, and you even stop eating afternoon and eat all their food in the first part of the day. So that obviously cuts out going to restaurants or dinner parties, all those kind of things. Keeping the 8 precepts also cuts out entertainments, music, wearing makeup, decorating yourself, and so on. So keeping the 8 precepts is very much in line with promoting mindfulness and insight and the practice of meditation, because you're streamlining and simplifying your life, at least for a period of time. So some people keep the 8 precepts for a day, 1 day a week, or for the whole Vasa sometimes. And I know a number of families where maybe the parents, they have families with children and maybe grandparents, and a number of people living in the house. Maybe 1 or 2 of the family keep the 8 precepts. Everyone else around them is not. And it's quite a challenge, but they can do it successfully because they have that faith and they're interested to raise the level of their practice. So they determine to keep the 8 precepts for 3 months. So you get mum or dad or whoever it is who's keeping the 8 precepts, very disciplined, having to give up their evening meal, and everyone else is still eating. I think the toughest one must be the mothers who sometimes keep the 8 precepts but still cook for the rest of the family, so they don't eat their own food in the evening. That's because they have great determination and discipline and faith in the Buddha, and they want to practice, but they still have their sense of duty and care to their families. So they're mixing the two, their family duty, but also the desire to practice the 8 precepts. People who can do that make very good karma. They're almost on the level of becoming a nun or a monk. Keeping the 8 precepts in a household situation with others around you who are not is not easy at all, but it's a sign of great determination. And it would be a cause for eventually ordaining as a monk or a nun. So the 8 precepts might be one of the hardest challenges for 3 months in the Vasa. The 5 precepts may be more doable in the lay life. Another very good practice to take up in the Vasa is developing your meditation practice. So again, it means sacrificing other things. So, thinking about how much you're going to use your mobile phone or your iPad or your computer for the 3 months. You might decide to just turn the equipment off for the whole 3 months, or limit it for just an hour a day or some period of time that you find manageable, so that you've got more time available for meditation. And you might determine to meditate an hour in the day, or 2 hours a day, an hour in the morning or an hour in the evening, or half an hour meditation, half an hour chanting, and so on. And what you're doing is setting up these small goals that you can achieve. You decide what you can manage or what's within the realm of your ability, and then you're just pushing yourself a little bit every day to do a bit more than you would normally. And most people find after 90 days, 3 months of this, they've achieved quite a bit. Their level of effort, discipline's improved. Maybe they've had some good meditations over those 90 days based on that persistent, consistent effort. And that's the kind of thing you can achieve, whether in the lay life or in the monastery. Over 90 days you can really learn about yourself and see what you can achieve and develop these small goals little by little, and particularly with meditation. So in the monastery, where it's more conducive to the practice, you might determine, people staying in the monastery might determine once a week to stay up all night on the full moon, new moon, half moon, to meditate and put effort into that. Again, eating little, sleeping little, practicing a lot kind of attitude, using the opportunity to develop that. Other practices that Sangha take on, sometimes people experiment with not speaking for a day or a week or the whole 3 months sometimes. Or not. Some people do the practice of not lying down. Some people do the practice of just eating their food all in one vessel at one time. So whether you're a lay person or a monk, you can practice that to develop more awareness, mindfulness around food, how much you're eating, and using mindfulness, eating food as a meditation. If you only eat once a day, you can eat as much as you want at that time, but just one sitting, once a day, and everything goes in one vessel, so on one plate or in one bowl. You can really learn a lot about yourself, because you'll learn to see some of your attachments that come up with food and how you like things. Some people will like to spread their food out, so they have dessert in one dish and main course in another and fruit in another or whatever. But if you just eat in one vessel, a bowl or a plate, everything has to go together, so you get some mixing of food together. But then the reflection is, well, that's what happens in your stomach anyway. And you start to look at your food slightly differently than just as an entertainment or a pleasure. It's more as just nutrition for your body. It starts to change your perception. And sleep, maybe you make a determination to go to bed at a certain time or get up at a certain time, more early than usual. And again, it changes your perception. Sleep is no longer just an escape or an indulgence, but it's maybe you just learn to sleep enough for your health, but not to indulge. So you might decide how many hours sleep I need. I'm going to get up earlier or stay up later. I had one friend who had problems with sleep as a monk. He would always sleep too much. So first of all, he made a rule: I'm only going to sleep 4 hours a night, which is quite common in monasteries. And he started doing that, but then he found he was getting lazy. The alarm would go after 4 hours, and he still wouldn't get up because he was so attached to his sleep. He liked it so much. So then he changed the plan, and he's still practicing sleeping for 4 hours a night, but he made a bed out of a plank of wood, and he put it on 2 bricks, either end of this plank. The plank was only maybe 8 or 10 inches wide, so quite narrow. So he'd have to sleep very mindfully on this plank of wood, and if he slept too long, he'd want to move because it's a bit uncomfortable, and he'd fall off, and that would wake him up. So he found that quite effective. So it's a time you can even experiment in this sort of way with the number of hours you sleep, how much you eat, how many times you eat, how you spend your free time. Even if you're holding down a job as a layperson, you may still have many hours in the day, particularly in the evenings or weekends, where you've got choices to make. And if your family duties are complete, maybe you have a few hours to yourself. Well, how are you going to use that time? Maybe it's a time to cut out some of the entertainments and the distractions that are not so important and focus more on meditation. This is what we can use the Vasa for, as a time to learn about ourselves and see where we can improve our effort in the practice, make more use of our time. But it's not always easy, and we encounter some resistance in our mind, stress, suffering, but some of that suffering is what we call the suffering for the overcoming of suffering. And that's why we practice, is to train this mind to be more mindful, alert, and to let go of some of our attachments, which are the cause of suffering. Ajahn Buddhadasa used to have a mantra that he'd say, a really good mantra to use while you're practicing the Dhamma, whether it's through when you're meditating or going about your business trying to practice mindfulness. It was a sort of statement that he said, you just keep repeating, and it was, I was not born just to spend my time suffering. Because all of us have stress and suffering come up in our lives, but often we're not yet seeing it as, something we have to do something about. We often just complain about our stress and suffering, or become resigned to it and just accept it. But suffering, and here I'm talking about mental suffering, is something we can do something about. It doesn't have to be like that, but you have to get that goal first. So again, coming back to what are your goals, what are your intentions in your day, in your life. So ask yourself, or say to yourself, I wasn't born just to suffer. Next time you're getting frustrated by your job or your health or the coronavirus rules and regulations or the weather or some person in your family or at work or whatever it may be, and you're experiencing some stress, or you're just trying too hard at something, making yourself stressed, getting disappointed when you don't get what you want, on and on it goes, isn't it, the kinds of suffering we have. But try and introduce this reflection, I wasn't born just to suffer. And immediately it's setting up your goal, which is to deal with whatever your state of mind is, recognize it for what it is, as suffering that can be abandoned. And some of these practices will do that. So if you decide to keep, say, the 5 precepts, there'll be times when you're stressed, you're suffering, maybe you want to say it out loud, you're upset with someone, so you want to say something not very nice to them, insult them or shout at them or get upset. It could be your kids, could be your partner, could be someone you work with. This morning we had a lot of Victorian police men and women in the monastery. They were searching for someone, and I noticed when the monks were with them, they all very well behaved and mindful, and as soon as we went away from them, they started swearing a lot, and they seemed to be very stressed getting their job done. So life is like that sometimes, isn't it? When things get stressful, when you're doing a job of work, you start to swear, start to let off steam. But this is the suffering we have, and sometimes we don't realize we're actually making it worse by being unmindful, unrestrained. So if you have a little reflection that you can bring up at those times, like, I wasn't born just to suffer, or maybe thinking of Ajahn Chah, you might bring up, oh, let it go, or oh, it's just the way it is. Whatever works to help you let go of that mental stress and strain at that particular time in that situation. It's a very good practice to bring up. So you might decide to do that for 90 days. I'm going to reflect or use the mantra, I wasn't born to suffer, or that's just the way it is, or something that has meaning for you in your own language, your own reflection. You can decide for yourself what it might be, and then you keep bringing it up every day. All of this is based on the principle, the idea that the human mind can be changed, it can be developed, we can abandon the unskillful and cultivate the good. And every aspect of the path is going in this one direction, which is for the end of suffering, whether it's just in the present moment, some mental strain and stress that's come up. By establishing mindfulness, you recognize what you're doing, you're holding on, you're attaching or clinging to a certain thought or mood. But having recognized, and what I must do is let this go, give it up. Because the more you hold on, the more you suffer. In Buddhism, we talk about the source of our suffering is clinging, attachment. And it's attachment to this sense of self. But the cause of this sense of self to arise is the clinging. Because sometimes people misunderstand, they say, I suffer because of this self, this attachment, this idea of self. And so then their solution is actually to go and try and hurt or get rid of the self. So, the most extreme one of that might be somebody who practices self-harm or tries to commit suicide. What we have to let go of or end is the attachment that causes the sense of self. So it's a refinement of understanding that tends to come when you do investigate this more and practice more mindfulness, and particularly when you practice meditation. You see, really the problem is when we start to cling, identify with our thoughts and feelings. When we cling without awareness, then this sense of self arises. But it's not this person that you have to get rid of, it's the clinging that you have to see and then let go of. And that's a subtle thing. So you have to work at it. And so that's why maybe practicing mindfulness every day, devoting some of your day to the practice of sitting or walking meditation, it's going to boost that energy and that level of awareness, so you start to recognize clinging for what it is. And really it's not much at all. It's just a lot of thoughts, ideas, some desires that come up, and we cling to them. And then from that we start to get stress and suffering, because you have desires for things you want that you haven't got yet, or desires to get rid of things, situations, people, feelings that you've got that you don't want, that you don't like. The more we cling, the more we suffer. But really what we cling to is not very much at all. It may be just a certain view or opinion on things, a thought, a feeling. It's like these, we were talking about it the other day, these flat pack furniture that we get. Sometimes people offer for the monastery, and it's useful because you need some basic furniture. But when you get flat pack furniture, the cheapest kind of furniture from these shops, when you put it together, you look at it, there's not much to it, is it? It's a bunch of very thin, lightweight wood and almost like cardboard, and a few screws and a few bits and pieces. You put it together, and from a distance it looks quite good. It looks solid, looks strong, it's quite pleasant to look at. It's been designed well. But when you get it in a flat pack, you realise there's not a lot there. But we're clinging to the idea we want a nice table or a nice chair or a nice chest of drawers, a nice cupboard. And that's how they get you. They print a nice picture of it and say, this is going to be good for you, for your house or whatever. So you buy it and you make it, and it does look good, but it might not be very strong, it might not last very long, because it's not actually made of very much at all. And if you assemble it from the flat pack, you realise that. You could almost just sort of push it over or push a hole through it, because it's so flimsy and so made of such thin, weak kind of materials. And attachment is a bit like that, attachment to self. We always get fooled by the kind of external image of self, the idea, the thing we cling to, and it seems real and it seems important, and that's why we suffer so much with it. But as soon as you start to become more mindful and investigate a little bit, some of that solidity and some of that image starts to dissolve a little bit, or your perception of the self changes a little bit, doesn't it, under investigation. Really, we're all just like that. We're just not much different from a bit of IKEA flat pack furniture. Maybe remember that next time you're getting really angry or really sad or upset or really excited about something. There's not a lot to that mood. It's just feelings, thoughts arising, passing away. The more you cling, the more you'll suffer. Even the flat pack furniture itself can become a source of suffering, isn't it? You get your new flat pack furniture with a lot of expectation, and then it doesn't last very long. Sometimes it quickly gets damaged or whatever. So a lot of our practice is like this. It's learning to bring up more awareness and investigate the mind and investigate our experience, and ask questions about what's going on in our mind, in our life. If we're suffering, that's like a clue. Rather than just getting caught up into the suffering, building it up into something very solid and believable in your mind, try not to do that. Try to stop and say, how real is this and what is it? You learn to stop and ask questions. Can I change this? The way I'm reacting to something, the way I'm believing in my own thoughts, opinions, feelings. And if you start getting into this habit, this is meditation in practice. And you don't just do it when you're sitting with your eyes closed. It can be during the course of your day. Just questioning some of the reactions we have in our mind, the moods that come up based on different experiences, different situations. And also questioning what we do, how we spend our time, the activities we're involved with, all kinds of different things we can look at and start maybe learn a bit more about ourselves, especially on a time of retreat. You learn about what is leading to what. If I'm stressed, maybe there are reasons for this. Maybe it's something to do with my lifestyle. I'm trying to do too much in too short a period of time. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe I'm not trying to do anything at all. I'm just being quite lazy or indulgent in my life, so naturally my mind is not very bright, and I'm not enjoying life very much. There could be 101 different situations we're experiencing, but there'll be causes that lead to stress arising. And you might have to ask yourself, this stress, where does it come from? What is it? What is its nature? How long does it last? Who does it belong to? Does it belong to anyone? Is it a person? The more we practice mindfulness, the better we get at doing that. Learning to turn our attention back, look at our experience, and start to break down some of our misperceptions, or what we say, attachments, or clinging to experience. It's not always easy, but if you get the basic principle right, then you'll start to get better at it the more you do. So it could even be just as simple as during the course of your day you're feeling very restless or worried about something or angry about something, and just stopping for a few moments, following the breath, establishing mindfulness, and maybe watching thoughts come and go, feelings arise, pass away, and changing your perception of what is going on at that time, or changing a habit of speech or action at that time. You're stopping yourself saying something or doing something that maybe is more destructive or harmful. One of the themes of the practice is learning how to stop and change direction in life. So the famous case is when the Buddha had to go and help Angulimala. If you've heard of Angulimala, he was that fellow who was a mass murderer in the time of the Buddha. He actually was someone with a lot of very good qualities, but he'd fallen under the spell of a teacher who had unwholesome ulterior motives for him, but he convinced him that the way to enlightenment was to go out and kill 1,000 people. So he became the most feared murderer in India in those days, and he was just coming up to completing his 1,000 murders. Each person he killed, he cut off their finger and kept a bone as a souvenir. So Angulimala means one with the necklace of finger bones. And so he had this huge necklace of all these finger bones around him. He's a very big, strong man, could run fast, he could fight, always had a sword with him. So he's basically feared wherever he went. A bit like in the cartoons, people would meet him and they'd just surrender straight away. They say, oh, it's Angulimala. They wouldn't bother running away. They just give up straight away, and he'd just chop their head off and kill them. He was so feared, even the king would send out, hordes, large numbers of police or army to chase him, and they'd either get killed or they'd come back scared. So no one could do much about him. But eventually it came the turn of the Buddha to help him. And the Buddha went out into the forest to where Angulimala was. And Angulimala had actually planned to kill the next person he saw to complete his 1,000 people. And by chance, the next person he saw was his own mother, because he's so fixed in his vow to kill that he thought, well, whoever it is, I'm going to kill them. So he was about to kill his own mother, which would have been terrible bad karma. But the Buddha came out, interceded, so that Angulimala said, oh, I'll get the monk instead, leave my mother, I'll go for the monk. So he started chasing the Buddha. It's one of those rare occasions the Buddha used his psychic powers, and he just kept walking mindfully and gracefully like a Buddha would. And Angulimala, this very strong, fit man, came chasing after him but couldn't catch him. The Buddha was just walking, but as fast as Angulimala ran, he couldn't catch him. So he got very frustrated, a bit of a workplace frustration, couldn't catch his next victim, so he started shouting, ranting at the Buddha, I can't catch you, stop, stop, stop. And the Buddha did stop. He turned around and he said, I've stopped, you haven't. Which flummoxed Angulimala. He's already impressed by the Buddha, the fact he couldn't catch him. Now the Buddha said, I've stopped, you haven't. And he was somebody who had a lot of skills, intelligence, so that made him think, what does he mean by that? So he forgot his desire to kill the Buddha and actually wanted to know what he meant. So he said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've stopped making all this bad karma, you haven't. And that was enough to hook Angulimala. He was attracted to the wisdom, the peace and the skills of the Buddha. So then he gradually became his disciple and became a monk and became fully enlightened. And it's always held up as this ability of human beings, even when they've committed quite a lot of very bad things, bad karma, there's always this chance with the right conditions, the right teacher, to turn around and change your mind. And Avasa, this range retreat, is a very good time for that. There may be certain habits, unskillful habits that you need to change, or there may be certain good habits you need to develop. This is a time to do that. This is a time where you can actually change the course of your life. And it doesn't have to be anything so dramatic, but just maybe some small, incremental, small level changes in your daily routine, your sleeping, your eating, how much you meditate, keeping precepts, how you spend your time, whether you're going to use technology and how you're going to use it, all the different parts of your daily activities. This is a good time you can look and say, well, what can I change? What can I stop? What can I start that might improve things? So maybe start meditating, or start meditating more or for longer. Start keeping precepts, start doing more dana. One of the things that we find with meditation is that unless you do some groundwork, even if you get a very good teacher and you've read all the books and you want to develop samadhi and states of insight, which is what most people do, if you haven't developed some basic generosity and precepts and mindfulness of your basic actions and speech in daily life, it's quite hard to develop states of samadhi or insight because your mind just doesn't settle down. So Avasa is a very good time to develop some of the inputs in these more ordinary but very doable things, like acts of generosity every day, doing something for somebody else in the family or in the community or in a monastery, keeping the precepts, and then reflecting on the good that you've done every day and practicing metta, developing the thought of kindness, compassion directed towards all beings every day. These kind of very simple, direct practices actually have they're very conducive to states of well-being, states of happiness arising in the mind, so that when you come to practice meditation and you're dealing with this monkey mind that doesn't want to settle down, it's a very quick way often to settle the mind down by reflecting on the precepts you're keeping, how you're spending your time, some of the skillful actions you've performed, reflecting on them as you meditate as a way to settle the mind down, bring this sense of well-being up. Or reflecting on the Buddha is another thing, just reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, your good fortune for having come to hear the Buddha's teachings. Some of these kind of simple reflections have a very wholesome effect on the mind and allow the mind to settle down, so that then you can turn to a meditation object like the breath. And when you're putting attention on the breath, what are you doing? Well, you're stopping. Like the Buddha said, I have stopped. Well, you're stopping a lot of your more unskillful or unmanaged mental activity, or the distracted thinking, the sleepiness, the worries, the sensual desire, and so on, what we call the hindrances. You are learning to stop following them and follow the breath. But to follow the breath, you have to start enjoying it. You have to have this sense of well-being and that willingness to let go of the other things which we're normally involved with. Again, it's back to this letting go of the sense of self. You know, we've cherished and guarded this sense of self for so many years, you could say lifetimes, that we're not that willing to let it go yet. But sometimes you have to take that risk and just say, well, trusting in the Buddha and all the teachers, Ajahn Chah, whoever it may be, I'm going to give it a go. For these 3 months, I'm going to practice my meditation on the breathing or whatever else, what other object you use. I'm just going to practice setting aside all these other mental states, hindrances that I normally identify with. The greed, the anger, the worry, the sleepiness, the doubts, all the things that fill my mind. When I meditate, I'm just going to practice setting them all down and turn to the breath. You also have to learn how to talk to yourself in the right way as you do this. So you have to remind yourself, this is something that's going to bring me some happiness. You know, you have to maybe lead yourself on yet. You might not have experienced the happiness yet, but at least tell yourself that there's a chance of that, so you're thinking in the right way as you do it. This can bring me some happiness, some clarity, some deeper understanding. It's going to improve my life. So give yourself the right pointers as you do this, and then have this sense of what I'm doing is stopping some old mental habits and developing and starting some new, better mental habits. Sometimes that's good enough, isn't it? Using the word stop or stop it. So you keep thinking about somebody you don't like, you're angry with them. Just tell yourself, stop it. Remind yourself that's what you have to do, rather than the opposite, which is to dwell on it, indulge it, keep it going. Or if you're getting obsessed about something you want, some sense desire, whether it's seeking sexual gratification, or if there's something you want in your life that you haven't achieved yet, that just keeps obsessing your mind, tell yourself, just stop it, let it go, give it up. We have to learn how to give ourselves the right instructions, but as you turn your attention to the breath more and more, this process of stopping, letting go gets easier. The breath becomes more of a source of relaxation, enjoyment. The mind and body start to relax more. Hopefully you can experience some of the peace, the happiness that comes as you do stop thinking about those other things, letting the hindrances go. And as your mind becomes more calm, then there's a chance to see some of your mental activity with more insight, to understand the temporary, impermanent nature of your thoughts and feelings. And rather than grasping on, holding on to them tightly every time, we're just watching them arise and pass away and not getting involved with them. Developing more of that detached equanimity that the Buddha said is, these are the fruits of the practice. The more mindfulness we have, the more we're able to reflect on this body and mind and our mental activity and see them as changing phenomena rather than just getting caught up with them and clinging all the time to every feeling, every sensation, every thought. If we can see them as changing, passing phenomena, then the mind starts to feel much more at peace within itself. It doesn't have to get so involved with every thought, every mood. And we understand the process of letting go of this attachment that causes us suffering. So this is the, as I was saying, the beginning of the Vasa. It's a good time to think about your practice. What do you want to achieve? What goals do you want to set yourself? Try not to be try not to be over-ambitious, because that sometimes happens. People become very enthusiastic and say particularly, I've seen it with monks, I'm not going to lie down for 3 months, do what we call the sitter's practice. So any rest I take is just in the sitting posture, which can be done. Human beings can do this, and particularly monks and nuns have tried it in the past and done it. But the idea is it's to promote more mindfulness, more effort, more energy in the practice. But often what it ends up promoting is just more grumpiness, more anger. And I've seen a few people take that practice on and get really stressed by it, very angry, irritable. Or some people decide to keep the 8 precepts and they find it too hard, so then they get irritable. And that tends to be the most likely outcome if you take on too much. You get start taking out your stress and the struggle of trying to do what you've determined to do, take it out on other people. So people can get very disappointed, upset, and get angry with others. Or the people who decide they're going to stop speaking for 10 days or a month, I'm not going to speak to anyone, and then after a little while they can't cope with it, so they start writing notes to all their friends, and just every little thing becomes a note. So, how are you today? Write it down. I need this, write it down. Or sometimes they also end up just chanting a lot. They can't speak because they've undertaken to not speak to anyone, so you hear them, they walk around the monastery chanting all the time. This is the only way they can actually use their speech or use their mouths. So be careful of that. If you take on some kind of determination, make sure it's something that you can do, it's viable. Don't take on too much. So these are just a few reflections on the Vasa, the 3 months that's coming up, both for the monastics and the laity. So I hope you can use this time to your advantage and use it as a time to further your practice, because in the end it's only going to bring you quicker to the end of suffering. The more effort you put into the practice, the quickly you'll attain the end of suffering, which is what we all want. So I wish that for you. May you all attain the end of suffering, and may you all find success in your practice.